Perfect timing. All right, we are live. It's the Gunner Technology Livestream, a weekly tech talk.
Fourth cup of coffee. I'm an overachiever today. I'm ahead of schedule.
It's feeling like a 2 or 3 pot kind of day for me too.
Yeah. It's one of those weeks actually. Been up late, but that's always good. So
yeah, better that than the other way.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so getting down to business. Our winner this week from the Country Shore giveaway, which you can sign up for on our Facebook page. That's countryshoreoutfitters.com, a lifestyle brand for anyone who loves the outdoors. April K from Tampa Bay, Florida. You got a hat coming your way, and I think we should start sending the ebooks to the Country Shore winners, even though there might not be a whole lot of crossover between those two demographics. Might as well send the ebooks along too. So April, enjoy the JavaScript ebook coming your way too. And jumping right into things here, because we were a little bit late because we had some audio issues, so apologies about that. Let me see, how do I want to introduce this? I'll tell you what, let me, by way of introduction to this week's topic, I'm going to talk about an article I recently read. So scientists at MIT have discovered, and I'm going to fudge some of the info up, but they basically discovered a way to link 2 photons together in a light beam. And what this means is if you can link 2 photons together in a light beam, you're almost all the way to quantum computing. And what quantum computing is, if you imagine how regular computers work. So right now, regular computers work based on electricity. So here's like a 2-minute overview of how computers work. So there's these little things called transistors, and they're getting infinitely small. There's something called Moore's law, which is the power of computing doubles every 18 months, I think it is. So there's little things called transistors, and they basically take a charge, and if it's below a certain threshold, like if it's less than a volt, that means that the transistor is off, and if it's above a certain threshold, like more than 2 volts, it means the transistor is on. And based on whether a transistor is off and on, you can host a live stream every Thursday at 1 o'clock. And so the cool thing with that is basically anything that can have a value of on or off can be used for computing. And here's a total other side. So you can use DNA for computing, actually, because there's 2 separate sides of DNA. So you can pretend that one side is off or 0 and one side is on or 1. And you can actually... People have built DNA computers that can play tic-tac-toe. People have built DNA computers that can solve what's called the traveling salesman program, which is basically if you take a city and you have 10 points you have to get to, what's the most efficient route a person can take to get to all 10 points, the shortest route. You can actually solve that in basically just like a bucket of DNA. You can give that problem to DNA and DNA can solve it with, it's a little more complicated than that, but not much. So by pairing these 2 photons up, you're a step closer to quantum computing. What quantum computing is taking advantage of quantum physics instead of, you still get into quantum physics with transistors, but it's basically entirely quantum based. And quantum computing is cool because you can solve problems. Like I know Google's AI team built a functioning quantum computer that solved the problem. It was 100 million times faster than a standard PC could solve it. And so if you think about what that means for companies that work with huge amounts of data and need tremendous amounts of processing speed, the landscape is going to completely change within the next decade if quantum computing really takes off. So that is a long-winded introduction to today's topic, or today's question, which is, how the heck do you keep up with advances in technology?
Well, I just learned something because I didn't know any of that, so I'm keeping up with it by listening to your intro. I mean, it's there's definitely not a short answer for that, and it's kind of like you have to obviously pick and choose. And what I mean by pick and choose is you got to kind of say, all right, so my specialization is X or my specialization is Y. So I'm going to focus on this. So for example, I was speaking to this group of attorneys contract lawyers, and they wanted to know about the blockchain and cryptocurrency and all this stuff. So I prepared something that was very specific to what they would need to know about cryptocurrency and blockchain technology, because it's just kind of insurmountable for someone with a full-time job in another industry to expect them to keep up even with one complete technology. I'm telling them they should focus on certain aspects of one technology, let alone a full technology, let alone technology in general. So the same thing kind of goes for us, and we have to have a broader survey of the landscape. There's no doubt about that, but we also need to kind of pick and choose what we are focusing on, because otherwise we would, there's a whole argument, especially in software and technology, whether you're an expert or a jack of all trades, and kind of that's a discussion for another day. But you kind of have to be a jack of, or like an expert of some trades if you're going to keep up with technology, and kind of be willing to ignore a big part of the rest of it, even if kind of your job function is in technology.
I think jack of some trades is the perfect description for the future of technology. It's going to be tough, though. I mean, if realistically, it seems like you have to take the plunge and technologize your company as much as possible, because the fact of the matter is you're only going to be able to do more with technology. So the later you start, the harder it's going to be to catch up.
Yeah, that's right. And again, you need to have sources of information, and with even if you're just kind of going to Google News or Apple News, and you're saying I'm interested in technology or I'm interested in blockchain, it'll deliver you news just based on your interests that you kind of put down there. And then even every morning, if you scan it, and number one, look for headlines that would affect your industry, or kind of like what's really smart, what really helps is if you're kind of working on a technology, or you hear about a technology, Google the technology and then explain it like I'm 5. And so there's a lot of good resources out there, and we kind of try to do this too, that will try to explain a new technology like you're a child. And it's up to you then to kind of think about how you could apply that, if and how you could apply that technology to your industry, your profession. And that's exactly what was going on with these attorneys that I was speaking to about blockchain. They were kind of looking for an expert to say, hey, in our industry, what do we need to look out for? And so I was talking to them about smart contracts and what could be moved to the blockchain to kind of remove middlemen, and the issues around cryptocurrency that they may need to prepare themselves for from a legal aspect. So you kind of have to do two things. And that's number one, if you hear something and you don't understand it, just kind of Google it. But Wikipedia isn't going to help you out for most of this stuff. You kind of got to Google, quantum computing, explain it like I'm 5. And then once you kind of understand how it is or what it is, then you can make an evaluation, and you're not always right, but you can make an evaluation on if this is going to affect me, which chances are it probably will at some point. And if so, how? And then try to get in front of that. If you can think of something and you're like, man, this machine learning, I could be really predictive in my delivery schedules, which would save me hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Like, don't sit on that idea, jump on it and talk to someone who is in technology who can vet that idea for you. Because if you have that idea, if someone hasn't had the same idea already, they're going to have it sooner or later. So act on it if you have that kind of idea.
I want to rope back to that too, but we actually have a question on Periscope from @Jose the Trucker with underscores in between those words. He wants to know what some good sources of tech news are. And I'm looking at my feedly.com setup. I've got BBC News, CNET News, CNN's tech coverage, Gadgets Now, Forbes, New York Times Technology, Reuters Technology, Gadgets360.com, TechCrunch, and The Verge. And those are all really good sources of tech news. I don't know if you have any ones in addition to that.
Yeah, those are really good. I mean, TechCrunch has kind of become, I don't really, TechCrunch and Mashable used to be really good sources, and now they're kind of just kind of like PR magazines for a lot of stuff. But Verge is good. I'll have to go through and look at my list of stuff that I'm kind of always on.
But that's a good place to start, at least, Jose. If you check those ones out.
That's definitely good. And a lot of these things are smart enough. A lot of these applications are smart enough to say, oh, if you're interested in, Wall Street Journal Tech or Bloomberg Tech, you're probably interested in X, Y, and Z. And it's a good place to start. And like I said, you don't want to get overwhelmed with it. It's not like you have to read every article that comes down the pipeline for your subscriptions, but it's just kind of nice to scan through it and kind of get a feel for a survey of the tech landscape kind of every day.
And roping back to your previous point about getting in touch with technology companies, just, I guess, talk people through how that works as far as people reaching out to us and what the process is, just getting in touch with us. Even if folks don't want to get in touch with us necessarily, it'll at least give people an overview of how that process actually works.
Yeah, it's really easy. We get phone calls, we get emails, we get social media messages. Hey, I'm a lawyer, and I have this idea, wondering if I can walk you through it. And generally that's how it starts. So usually we set up a phone call and the person kind of walks me through the idea. And we usually have a lot of questions, a lot more questions than answers on the first go around. And usually what it amounts to is we are trying to understand the idea. So the end of the conversation will kind of be something like, let me get this straight. Is this, and kind of summarize what the person said. And for the person to be like, yeah, you got it. Yeah, that's exactly right. Or no, you don't have it. Let me explain it again, or ask some more questions to refine it. So we want to make sure that we're on the same page. Once we're on the same page, then that's when we run off and do some research. Does this idea exist? Is someone else working on this idea? How difficult from a software perspective is going to be? How is there any other resources we need to pull in? Kind of get an idea of the 100,000 foot overview of this idea and kind of what to prepare this person for. And also kind of, we do a little bit of market research too, and be like, I just don't think this is a good idea. I just don't think there's enough people to support this. Or yeah, actually this is an amazing idea. And there's a lot of, we think there's a lot of interest in something like this. So it would be easy to get off the ground. After that, we kind of take them through the process of what it would look like. And especially for a new idea, as we've said in other episodes, what we basically want to do is prove the concept as quickly as possible. And that takes the form of building a prototype. And so building the prototype means we want to get something functional. It's not pretty. It may have bugs, but it does the basic tasks that it sets out to do. This is really important, especially for solo entrepreneurs who have almost no budget and they're trying to raise investment.
And just a point there, I think if you're actually looking to have a company build a prototype, you need to make sure that they can actually do so rapidly. So you maybe touch on our stack real quick in JavaScript and AWS and how that allows us to build stuff in a matter of hours sometimes.
Yeah, well, it's not even our stack. I mean, it is in some respects, but I think more importantly, in conjunction with our stack is, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but we literally don't do anything once. Everything we do is set up with the mindset that we're going to do it more than one time. So we never kind of have to do the same thing twice. And in software, there's a lot of repetitive work. There's a lot of setup work. When we get a new project, we automate it, even if we never have to do it again. We automate it and we document it. And we'll have video documentation of just about everything. So that means if bringing on someone new to the team or to the project is, lockstep. There's existing documentation. There's existing processes. It's very easy to onboard someone and get them contributing to the team almost immediately. The same thing that kind of goes into our technology stack, which we're using a stack that is ideal for prototyping and for growth. So we have a JavaScript stack when we basically build mobile apps. I'm using mobile apps as an example, using React Native. So React Native basically allows you to build native, like honest to goodness, not fake iPhone apps, or excuse me, mobile apps for both iPhone and Android simultaneously. So that allows us to kind of get a functional prototype on both devices in the same time it would take us to get a prototype functioning on a single device. Not to mention that JavaScript, the language that powers React Native, is much more forgiving or conducive to prototyping than, say, Java or Swift, which are kind of the languages that are used to power Android and iOS respectively. So
there's a much higher learning curve there. It's much harder to just sort of dig in and get started.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the community, the open source community for JavaScript, like if you ever have a question, they'll get on it like immediately. Like, I mean, they are on it. There is so much information out there existing today. It's crazy. And the other thing is, like you mentioned, AWS. So AWS, man, we could take 100 shows to talk about AWS, but they offer services. They offer kind of architecture in the cloud. And a lot of that architecture is flip of a switch. And especially what we use, which is called serverless, which is a number of technologies on AWS, but mainly centers around Lambda. And so basically what Lambda does, it lets you go with no extra work on your part. No extra work on your part. You can go from 1 user to 1 billion users, and you will have the same performance across the application. And you don't pay for anything you don't use. So literally, when you talk to startups, one of they have 2 problems. One is getting up and running, and then 2 is if they get popular, scaling to meet demand. So we've kind of already eliminated that problem right there. So our choice of technologies allows us to get up and running very quickly, and then actually develop something that you can see and you could take to an investor and be like, hey, instead of describing my idea to you, let me just show you my idea. There's some stuff we want to do, or we think we want to do, but I wanted to show this to you, get your feedback, see what you have to say, and kind of work through where and what we could do with this application should we get funding for it.
All right, so that basically covers one meaning of the word keep up, which is basically stay informed. Is keep pace. So I have a quote actually from Ray Kurzweil, who's a futurist. He says, "We won't experience 100 years of progress in the 21st century. It will be more like 20,000 years of progress at today's rate." And he also thinks the singularity is coming in 2045, so get pumped about that. But with the exponential advancement in technology, what should companies do to keep pace with this rapidly changing field?
One thing that immediately comes to mind is to keep a very thin full-time staff. And that may sound crazy, but, and I really don't want to kind of take shots at anyone in our industry, but a fact's a fact, or evidence is evidence rather. And the evidence is always pointing to me that people who are full-time with a company fall behind the learning curve very quickly because they are only focused on the technology that the company uses. And that is bad. That is bad news if you get locked in on a certain stack. I mean, and again, you kind of have to. If you're working full time for a company that uses a Java technology, your focus is going to be Java. The problem is if it's a full time job, you have very little time to go play around with JavaScript or Swift or Erlang or all these other Go, all these other languages, all these other technologies. Same thing. If you are working with an on-premise data center, you don't have much experience with AWS, and AWS removes almost every possible use case for an on-premise data center at this point. So,
and actually, just to jump in, people can go listen to our episode about technology, government's use of technology, for sort of an interesting discussion of how getting stuck with a legacy stack really hinders your ability to keep up with advances in technology.
That's exactly right. And so kind of, and not just Gunner Technology, I know I can speak intimately on Gunner Technology, but a lot of agencies are like this, is we view ourselves like a SWAT team. And so we have to kind of stay up on the advances on the entire landscape so we can jump on a problem or an opportunity at the drop of a hat. We're like the guys you call in when you want the job done right and quickly. So our whole thing is to not get locked into anything and always be testing and prototyping in other technologies. Because the last thing we want to do, and we certainly don't see this happening, but we don't want AWS to get overtaken and still be focused solely on AWS. And then in 5 years, AWS is just kind of, obsolete because, and we ignored the fact by just focusing solely on AWS. So we have chosen and preferred stacks, technologies, languages, and such, and so forth. But we're always testing out new infrastructure, new programming languages. We're always keeping up with the latest in that because we don't want to get locked in on something.
And speaking of the latest and greatest, from the hardware side, what do you recommend for companies as far as keeping up with stuff there? I mean, there's so many different mediums now for transmission of data and information and usage. So what should folks do there with the hardware side of things?
Yeah. So again, I kind of touched on it, and there's just no reason to have on-premise anything at this point. I mean, unless you're just like Google or Facebook, or you're just a massive company. I mean, even the argument used to be as well, if you had really tight security constraints, well, even that doesn't hold water anymore because AWS will have every single security certification you need. Staying up, I think it's harder for us to stay up on infrastructure trends than it is on software trends. And kind of the reason being is I think there's a little bit higher barrier to testing the infrastructure trends. And man, AWS and even Google Azure Microsoft Azure and Google's cloud, they're coming up with new services all the time. So for example, Elasticsearch is kind of this stack of software that you put on a customized server, and it creates a search engine for you for your software to use. And so you take time, you learn how to set up an Elasticsearch search engine on a Java server, blah, 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 blah. And then a week later, AWS has a push button solution to have Elasticsearch up and running kind of with no overhead whatsoever. So how I follow that is AWS is one of the few people I follow on Twitter, and we follow their Twitch channel and we follow their YouTube channel because they're always putting out good overviews and tutorials and announcements on what they're releasing now, which just changes so rapidly that it really helps. And again, it's the same with software. Like you'll see this and you're like, wow. So AWS is now offering like push data or push button business intelligence. That could really help me generate reports on my subcontractors to figure out which subcontractors every month are costing me the most money. And that's the thing. Okay, well now I don't know how to do that. I know it's existing. Who can I get to do that for me? And for someone like us, doing that is pretty easy because all we need to do is have access to your data, and we can feed that into AWS. And the next thing you know, you have kind of full business intelligence reports every month or even on demand.
And what about the gadget side of things? Because I know, the iPhone's only, I think, 10 or 11 years old at this point. VR is really only 5 years old. I was just about to mention Let's see if Alexa actually chimes in, but Alexa's only 3 years old. So how do you keep up with the changing trends as far as device usage goes for individual users of your application and website?
Yeah, that's a really, actually, when you said that, my Alexa perked up when you said that, actually. But it's interesting because you can, so from a business owner standpoint, we always will put analytics on an app or a site for our clients. And so they can look at it and say, or we can look at it and say, okay, 80% of your traffic is coming from a mobile device, and 70% of that traffic is coming from Android devices. And we kind of break it down how your product is being used from a device standpoint. So that's a good way to keep up with how your consumers or how your clients, how your customers are using your products. How to keep up with products in general, man, it's almost overwhelming. And honestly, this is somewhere where I am not on top of, I am not the best person to talk to about which gadgets are the top of it. We have people in the company that are much more on top of gadgets than I am. I mean, I have my Alexa. I like Alexa in some respects. But the interesting thing, what I was trying to get to is, I don't know how a business owner, and I guess it's this kind of the same thing, is to your point, find the trade publications that are keeping up with gadgets. And you kind of look at the, examples and, oh my gosh, well, imagine if my customers could order like AC repair from Alexa. Like, Alexa, I need an AC guy. And it would automatically call us and say, well, okay, well, we have this AC repair guy. He'll be out in an hour. So it's kind of like, again, incumbent upon the stakeholders to keep up on a survey basis of what's out there and kind of use their imaginations to be like, well, is there anything we can do there? And by the way, to take one more step back, it's kind of like you were asking about what the process looks like when someone has an idea. We've also had business owners or department heads contact us and be like, I read about this Siri thing. I read about this Alexa thing. I read about this, whatever thing. Here's my business. Is there anything we can use that for? We've had it as open-ended as that. It just, most times there is something with technology. There's almost always an applicability for technology to almost any industry. So we've had that where it's just like, hey, I heard about this. I don't really understand it, but I also don't want to find out in a year that my competitors understood it and they left me in the dust, kind of thing. So that's another way, just to kind of, if you don't understand something, but you kind of hear about it all the time, and you want to understand it, or at least you don't want to, get passed up because you didn't understand it. People reach out to us for that too.
I think that's a great note to end it on. I think it's an exciting challenge, and people shouldn't hesitate to reach out for tips, or if you guys have any questions, just let us know and we'll be happy to help you out. But that's going to do it for this episode. Shout out to our sponsor again, Country Shore, countryshoreoutfitters.com, lifestyle brand for anyone who loves the outdoors. Check out our podcast on iTunes, our blog at gunnertech.com, and our ebooks on Amazon, iBooks, Barnes & Noble, and anywhere else ebooks are sold. That's going to do it for this week. We'll see you guys next Thursday, 1 o'clock Eastern. I'm Derry. That's Cody. Thanks for tuning in.